Hello and welcome to another edition of another book review. This week I'll be reviewing Guilty Admissions by Nicole LaPorte. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into an overview of what the book is, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. I reviewed Nicole LaPorte's earlier book, The Men Who Would Be King. I'll put that review below if you want to check that out and learn more about her background. Suffice it to say, she's a reporter mostly dealing in the entertainment industry, and that comes into play a little bit in this book, which I'll go into a little bit later. But what this book is really the meat and potatoes story of the Varsity Blues scandal, which was involving the ringleader of which was a man named Rick Singer, who was able to promote himself as a kind of a college whisperer. He was able to go to really wealthy individuals and tell them, hey, I can get your child into basically anywhere that they want to go. And he had connections mostly in athletics departments at schools such as Georgetown and UCLA and USC and the University of Texas, and was able to use those connections at Yale in order to get the children of the ultra wealthy the children of the very wealthy into these prestigious schools. What she does is she looks at not only the culture of LA, of the from really birth all the way up to admissions for colleges, just kind of the rat race that the parents of these children, the pressures they put on themselves, the pressures they put on their children in order for them to kind of continuously be succeeding. Many of them, the parents didn't go to college or went to fairly unprestigious colleges. Some of them are legacies, but most of them are really nouveau rich, and they're trying to give their children all these advantages. And one of them being, working with this guy who illegally was able to get people into schools, either by helping them, by cheating for them. Some of it was legitimate tutoring, but most of it, as far as the scandal is concerned, was having a proctor essentially take the tests for them, or he was bribing coaches in these places to vouch for the students, even if the student didn't play that particular sport. So, for instance, he would go to the Yale soccer coach, the women's soccer coach, and have money would be exchanged in order for that child to attend Yale while not really being expected to play on the soccer team. So this was really a big story a few years ago, and so I wanted to go into this and get more information about it. And I think she does a pretty good job of laying out who Rick Singer is up until I'd say probably really the beginning of this scandal. He's a relatively private person, so she doesn't get a ton of really great stories about him when this started. She goes into his past, shows you where he came from, and he was kind of always tied to athletics, and he kind of used his role as a coach in the, I think, early 80s, late 80s. He bounced around Sacramento, bounced around a few different places. He got some work done at IMG, it's kind of a preppy school for athletes in Bradenton. He made some connections there and eventually basically went full-time into college. And it's kind of, I'm just going to call it a scam because it really is a scam. And he's just kind of this guy who's a hustler. He's always hustling and he's always trying to make money. When this all blew up, it was interesting to me that he had basically funneled some of the money he made from the parents into these apps. He was going to make several different apps that were related to colleges, but they seemed relatively legit. So who knows what would have come of those. But I think she does a good job of going into his background. She does a good job of going into the culture around these kind of nouveau rich parents and why they have all this pressure on them in order for them to succeed, and how that pressure starts very young in terms of the children. So, really preschool level, these people are scoping out private preschools and making connections and doing all these things, making all these donations. So you really understand why, the psychology behind why someone would say, I've been paying private schools my child's entire life since they were 2 years old. This is just another payment to people. And so I did come away with it. I was surprised at how much sympathy I really did have for many of the parents in this. She goes into some of the larger cultural things with colleges and kind of explains how there are many wealthy parents have been able to juice the system in terms of getting their children extra time. This isn't illegal, but it's basically paying psychologists who are going to vouch that your child has a learning disability and basically allow that child to get extra testing time, which, while not illegal, is maybe unethical. And she compares what it's like in the rich counties in LA or the rich parts of LA to the poor parts of LA, and it's just a very vast difference as far as the number of students who are able to get extra time and things like that. So she does indict the system as a whole. I think there are some cons with it. She calls that I think they're called 504s. I'm not sure where the 504 designation came from, but it basically is about extra time for kids with disabilities and how rich people are able to kind of milk that system in order to kind of give their child a leg up. So part of this whole story of trying to give their children a leg up in this system, and how they feel a lot of times the parents, kind of similar to what Scott Galloway was talking about in Adrift, and how he's talked about this in other videos, where he basically was like, if I had tried to get into UCLA today, they wouldn't let me in. But when I went, the admission rate was like 50 or 60%, and now it's down to like 1/10 that. So there is a little bit there is some logic and reason. Whether or not you think it makes this ethical, I don't think anybody thinks what these people did was ethical, but it does give you some understanding of why they were able to think the way that they did, given the way that schools have become this certification machine, and how the numbers are really not working in their advantage, especially if they're people who are from privileged backgrounds. And so that's kind of their feeling on it. I thought she basically goes over the fall of Rick Singer really quickly, and how his system was relatively simple. He had kind of just collected money. He had a bunch of cronies he essentially worked for him who made money on the side. And it goes into why he targeted athletics, because essentially it's just easier from the numbers standpoint to get your child in through as an athlete than really anything else. Even a really above and beyond legacy, if your child is an athlete at that particular sport and meets the minimum requirements of the school, they have much, much more likely to get into these prestigious schools. And then the other part of it was I didn't really think of it in these terms before reading the book, but she does a good job of showing you why Olympic sports coaches specifically were so prone to working with this guy, even though they knew what they were doing was illegal and wrong. She kind of explains how the Georgetown tennis coach was making like $65,000 as the Georgetown tennis coach. So I don't know if he was able to live in Northwest DC on 65 if they gave him housing or what it was, but you kind of see that, you think of college athletics as always being flush with money, and that money doesn't always trickle down to some of these other coaches. And some of that kind of was different at the school level. I didn't realize that like 10% of Georgetown students were athletes. That's how many varsity sports they have. So it's one of those things where the funding was tight for a lot of these places, and so the coaches were really prone to take the kickbacks. And so in order to basically vouch for the child. So it was kind of a two-prong approach where Singer was able to hire someone that he knew from IMG to basically take these tests for the children and basically say that this was their score. So he basically pumped up their numbers. It could be 200 points, could be 300 points, whatever it was on the SAT. And then also he could work with these coaches in order to procure a spot for them. And no one was doing a lot of checking when it came to the non-revenue sports of basketball and football. Everything else was really kind of open. And so he was really smart and worked that system for a long time. I think he made about $25 million over the course of 7 or 8 years. So that was good. And I think the other thing that I knew at the time, but it was reiterated in this book, this is a relatively small number of people who are involved in this. I mean, there were only, I think, 33 children, so about 50-something parents who are really involved. It wasn't this mass widespread thing. It was a relatively small number of people over a relatively short period of time. So it wasn't really this prolonged system that involved hundreds and thousands of people. It was a relatively small number of people. They just happened to be relatively wealthy and relatively famous. She goes beat by beat as far as what we know about the Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin. She kind of explains that and kind of the documents they had as far as the court stuff. So I thought all that was interesting. There's a little bit of a length problem. I think it probably could have been cut down a little bit. There are sometimes that the book gets a little repetitive, and there's some access issues. She doesn't have access to everybody. She obviously didn't get access to Rick Singer, so she didn't really get into his psychology as much. She has other people. I think she cites some forensic psychologist documents to give you a sense of who the guy is, and I think she does that because she knows he's kind of the mystery of all this, of why he's doing all this, and other than just rampant greed, you have to kind of speculate. I was also surprised at why some of his cronies were doing it. I mean, the guy who worked at IMG, I don't know how much he was making to teach SAT and ACT scores to these athletes, but he was basically faking the test for $10,000 a pop. It didn't seem like that much money to risk your career, so I would have liked, that guy's name is Mark Rydell, I would have liked to have heard more about him. But I think she does do a fair job of reporting the story. I think that it's maybe a little bit long in some places. And I think, too, the other thing that she maybe does is she lets the schools off a little bit here. And I think there maybe could have been room for her to give a deeper indictment on the schools. Because there is a lot of commentary on the time of the problem with these people weren't that they were too rich, it's they were too poor. Steven Spielberg wants to get his child into USC. He's able to donate a $25 million building, and magically the child gets in. And, Full House is just not paying out that much money. And so this is kind of what he refers to, Singer refers to his strategy as the side door in all this. And he basically finds this loophole and basically bribes people essentially to let these kids in. I think they're definitely victims, and I don't want to like, condone the behavior. But I also think that she does a good job of explaining why the thought process was the way it was. And the book is not really about admissions in terms of like how she doesn't really talk to a lot of admission officers as far as like why is it so exclusive and what could be done to make it less exclusive. There's not really a lot of prescriptions. It was really just a story of just like this is what happened. And if that story is interesting to you, then I think you'll like this, because I think she does a pretty good job. But it's not really, if you're looking for like a deeper indictment on a larger society, I don't think it's really there. I think it's really mostly the story of the people who are involved in this, the story of Rick Singer, the story of the culture around LA, because LA is really the epicenter of where all this takes place. There's a couple of people outside LA, but most of it's LA kids. And a lot of it is SC, and you kind of see the kind of inroads that Singer made to SC, the inroads he made at Yale was the other big school they kind of talk about a little bit, and Georgetown are the kind of the schools where you kind of see the coaches and things from the coach's side. So that is Guilty Admissions by Nicole LaPorte. If you're interested in learning about this scandal at a deeper level, I think this is a pretty good book. It didn't blow me away, and I don't think I learned a ton new, but I think it is a pretty good description if you want to understand the ins and outs of how the scam worked. Since this book has been published, the schools have made some changes. I think the changes are basically to try to draw attention from the fact that some of their coaches are not particularly well paid, and also to like not get involved in anything like this again. So to the best of my knowledge, since this has happened, nothing else on this scale has happened. I think the story was a little overblown when it was reported in terms of like just the number of kids, because it really was relatively few number of kids. But still, I think it was a bad look for everybody involved, and I think that the schools rightfully have kind of tried to put in safeguards since this in order to disavow as much of this as they can. She does get into like the private guidance counselors and stuff like that, and how their feelings on Rick Singer was they pretty much hated this guy. And that actually is not where the scandal broke. The scandal broke because someone who was involved with Rick Singer was also involved with this other guy who was actually busted for something else, and he ratted, and then the coach ratted, and then eventually Singer got caught. So I thought that was done. It was told really quickly, but that's pretty interesting of how the scam actually came about being discovered by the FBI. It's a relatively small number of people who were involved in the scam. I mean, Rick Singer kept his cards pretty close to the vest, and he wasn't ousted by any of the parents or by the schools, really. It was really just this bigger thing that he kind of got caught up in. So that's Guilty Admissions, and next time I'm going to read something completely different, Blind Sight, which is a hard sci-fi novel by Peter Watts. If you have read Guilty Admissions and you think there's anything I got wrong about it, let me know. I thought it was pretty good. I thought it could have been a little bit shorter, and I thought it could have maybe included more indictment of the schools themselves. I do think she does a good job of being sympathetic to the parents, so I did enjoy that. So that's Guilty Admissions. Until next time, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Until next time, bye.